Hello, it's Diane, and I have a vintage junk journal to show you. I'll probably try to go through this pretty quickly because I just tried to film it and I took way too long, and so I'm going to do it again and try not to talk so much. This is made with a vintage book. It was called Thelma, and it had, well, here's the spine, Thelma by somebody named Corelli. I'm going to turn this into a bookmark. I already Mod Podged it to some coffee dyed paper, and I will put an eyelet here and a fiber so it can be a bookmark that will go with the book. I covered up the title of the book and the author's name by stitching this gorgeous embroidered lace to a piece of burgundy cardstock, and then I glued it on there. And the corners of the book were very frayed, so the four corners, front and back, have these beautiful book corners, metal book corners. There's a metal tag on the front that says, "Always be on the lookout for the presence of wonder." It has 3 signatures and a 1.5-inch spine, and I covered the spine with this beautiful ruffled trim and then rosettes down the center and some crocheted trim on the front and the back, and then this sticker on the stamp on the back says "Uniquely Handmade, Limited Edition." Has a Tim Holtz hitch fastener here, and I want to point out that I purchased hitch fasteners. I ran out of the Tim Holtz, and so I purchased some from Hobby Lobby that were the Paper Studio brand, and they don't work on these book covers. Even though this is not a thick book cover, the shaft of these screws on here are too short. So I just want to warn you, don't think that if you buy these from Hobby Lobby, the Paper Studio brand, that they will be the same as Tim Holtz, because they're not. They're shorter. So anyway, 3 signatures in here. This is a dark green flower here, and I used a green cardstock to make the spine, and then I used this green patterned paper. This is cut with my Cricut and then stamped with "This Book Belongs To." This was also cut with my Cricut to kind of go along with that paper. Coffee dyed scrapbook paper and coffee dyed copy paper is used throughout the book, as well as some coffee dyed ledger and some vintage ledger. This is one of the homemade ephemera pieces that I made with a file folder, and I stamped on it, just punched a couple of slots there and then stitched it on as a pocket. This is a vintage postcard from Canada, and this is a card that I purchased probably from the Paper Basket, Katie Doucette's shop. There's some stamping in here. Here's one of the ledger, coffee dyed ledger papers. If they're coffee dyed, they're not vintage. And there's another piece of the ephemera that I made, and a couple of digital tags and fibers. This is a crinkly brown bag, and this little piece here was cut with my Cricut, and I rubbed it with pink ink because it was white, and then I attached it with some pink eyelets. There's a garment pin here. I punched a hole and put in a reinforcement garment pin, a little tiny jewelry tag with a rub-on, and a little scrap of lace. This is from the front page of the book, and it's pretty sturdy, so I pretty much left it alone. I just cut it and corner punched, rounded it, and then stamped on the back. This can be used for journaling, but it has the original writing, "A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to Laura from Emma," and it's dated 1907. And I just realized that this has the price I paid for it at the flea market plus the seller's initials, and it's in pencil, so I'll try to erase that. I'll leave it out. And here's a basket of some kind of lily or something. This is from Tsunami Rose, and I stitched it to coffee dyed paper. Here's a vintage paper, and this is a free printable from Ephemera's Vintage Garden. Each of the 3 signatures has one of these tabs. Each of the 3 signatures also has a page from this vintage needlework book that Julie sent me. And this page has a project featuring red poppies, and then I have this vintage gift tag that has a red poppy on it, so I used that to decorate the page, and some steam binding. There's a vintage sticker coffee dyed ledger. Here's a little paper from Julie. There's some coffee dyed paper here. It's the center of the signature, so it's stitched in here. And this is a little tuck spot here. I stitched on this trim, and this is a piece of an embellishment that Jill Robertson made. And then here's a large index card with pansies stamped on it. And here is another Tsunami Rose printable, but I forgot to stitch that to coffee dyed paper, so I will do that, and then it will be in that pocket. There's a stamp up here, one of my definition banners, coffee dyed ledger paper. I sprinkled salt on it to get that effect while it was wet. Probe card, and this is a tuck spot. There's a piece of scrap vintage ledger glued onto that. And here's some vintage lined paper. It's got a little blue tint to it. This is from a children's book. Here's the other side of the bag, and it has an alterations tag from A Tattered Dream. This is from a vintage knitting book, and there's a little scrap of trim glued here and a pretty rosette. Vintage, or not vintage, but coffee dyed ledger. Did I say in this video that if it's coffee dyed, it's not vintage? That was probably in the first video that I tried to do. There's a Stampin' Up! Stamp. There's some stamps up here. I think those are Recollections border stamps. This is a couple of tickets that I bought from Katie Doucette's Paper Basket shop on Etsy. And they're sewn on as a pocket. And I believe that Julie sent me this photograph. Vintage photograph, and it was glued into one of those old black scrapbooks, photo albums, so it has black on the back, but I'm going to cover that with coffee dyed paper too. And this is a little vintage children's card that Julie sent me. Signature 2. It has a Tim Holtz Bugle Boy, a glassine bag from Denise's shop, and a tag made with my Cricut, and a cigarette card featuring a Dutch Airlines plane. This is a pocket made with Tim Holtz paper and this little ticket, little sale ticket that I bought from Katie's shop. This came from Julie, and I stitched this on as a pocket also, and there's a little coffee dyed tag in there, and then these are digital printable tags. Some stamping here, and here's another tab. This is vintage paper. This is, I don't know how vintage this is, but this is something Julie sent me, and it's not new. Here's the other side of that bag, and it has a piece of the railroad tissue. And this was written on with grease pencil. They aren't all written on like that, but the grease pencil rubbed off on my hands when I glued this down, so I sealed it with Mod Podge. This is a advertisement from a vintage magazine for fresh cream deodorant. Are you really lovely to love? And it's got coffee dyed paper stitched to it. There's this tab here on the bag. And this is from a vintage magazine with a cute little poem on it. And it's just glued to this coffee dyed scrapbook paper scrap. Vintage ledger here. Coffee dyed paper. There's a stamp. Here's another page from the needlework book. Here's the center of this signature, and this one has vintage music glued to it there, and there's another of the vintage tickets from Katie's shop. It's on a garment pin, and this is a little tiny vellum tag that I got on clearance very inexpensively. I don't remember how much, but it's a little vintage, or a vellum. It's got a little rub-on on it. Here's an advertisement for Boys to Sell Grit magazine. I remember Grit magazine. And there's coffee dyed paper on the back. It's actually kind of a newspaper. Yeah, it's called America's Greatest Family Newspaper. And this is an Amish barn. I think it's Amish. Maybe not. But Julie sent me, I think Julie sent this to me in my box. Somebody sent it to me. If I got it wrong, I apologize. There's a stamp. Another needlework book page, another illustration from a children's book. So you have a dog and a cat in here. Some pretty roses that were printed on tissue, so I tore around it and glued it on, and some scrap paper here. Coffee dyed paper with a piece of coffee dyed muslin here and seam binding. A guest check from Canada. It's got some French words on it. A coat room check, which someone sent me, and this is a Cavallini sticker. Vintage ledger, another brown bag, and some vintage advertising, and a little Tim Holtz girl, and this arrow I cut with my Big Shot. There's a tag, a large tag with a stamp on it, and the back is stamped with corrugated cardboard to form the lines. I'll get that in there later. The other side of that Mod Podged tissue. And the other side of the vintage paper, coffee dyed paper with a stamp, coffee dyed scrapbook paper here with some, this is a refund slip that someone sent me, and it's glued on for journaling. Tim Holtz, photo booth people, some lace, and another Cavallini sticker. Third signature. This is an advertisement for an old RCA TV with a beautiful bright butterfly. There's trim stitched on there. There's a little shape punched from a coffee dyed index card to write on, and this is a vintage postcard, oil wells and orange groves along a California highway. This is from Katie's shop, the Keystone Coca-Cola Bottling Company from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Katie does not live in Pennsylvania, but I do. And not too far from Wilkes-Barre, too, so I had to have those. So I ordered some from her shop. Cavallini sticker. This is a piece from a guest check. Beautiful corner stamp there. A beautiful lady. Coffee dyed ledger paper tab. There's a tuck spot. Oh, I'm not going to take that out. This is just a scrap of scrapbook paper, and I paper clipped it up there with a spiral paper clip. And this I made with my Big Shot and stamps. There's a striped bag, and I glued this trim to it, and there's a vintage Clue score sheet in there. This is cut from a children's book. This is a stamp, vintage ledger, vintage needlework book with some cheesecloth and seam binding. This is vintage paper, and I put this delightful sticker there. And this is another piece of the ephemera that I made with some stamping, and there's a garment pin with a little metal tag that says Truth, and this pretty tag was made with my Cricut. Vintage notebook paper. There's another vintage sticker. And here's a vintage envelope someone sent me, and the liner is a little bit crinkly and striped, and I like that. It feels like a very good quality envelope, and there's a Cavallini sticker, a vintage current recipe card, and library card, catalog card. And I glued a collage of things to the back. I think this is something, I think that's printed, it's not vintage, but someone sent me several of those. And these are canceled Queen Elizabeth Canadian stamps that I received when I ordered stamps from a seller on Etsy, and he's from Canada, and he sent me some bonus freebies. These might be the ones I purchased, because I purchased a set of Queen Elizabeth stamps. I'm not a smoker. I do not condone smoking, but I think the cigar bands are gorgeous, and someone sent them to me, so I glued one in there. There's another vintage photograph. Vintage advertisement, and I made this little label that says family. Vintage needlepoint or needlework book. More seam binding and a little piece of felt rickrack and a sticker. The other side of the bag. There's a banner there. More seam binding and another little thing that I made. Coffee dyed ledger, a Ferris wheel stamp, vintage appointment book, and then a vintage pen ad and then this lady. And I thought she went perfectly with this ad that says, here's the inside story, because it looks like she's telling a secret. Vintage paper, another embellishment from Jill, and then here's a, library pocket that I stamped on. It's got my signature here and a coffee dyed library card. This goes in here. I pulled it out by mistake, and then loops over there. So there it is. This will be listed on my Etsy shop, and I hope you enjoyed seeing it. Have a great day.